The courtroom fell into an eerie silence as 6-year-old Madison Thornton stepped through the heavy oak doors, her tiny fingers clutching the leather leash of Atlas, a battle-scarred German shepherd with watchful amber eyes, every head turned, every breath held. The prestigious Arizona v. Whitaker case, already the most closely followed trial of the decade, seemed to pause as the child approached the witness stand. Judge Eleanor Blackwood leaned forward slightly, her experienced gaze softening at the sight of the girl who hadn't spoken a word since the attack 3 months ago. Across the room, Blake Whitaker, respected real estate mogul and philanthropist, maintained his practiced expression of concerned innocence. Only the slightest twitch of his manicured fingers betrayed any reaction. Then it happened. As Madison settled into the witness chair, her small hand made an almost imperceptible gesture, a silent signal that transformed Atlas instantly. The dog's body tensed, hackles rising as a low, rumbling growl emerged from deep in his throat. His eyes locked onto Whitaker with unmistakable recognition. Judge Blackwood's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "This court is in recess immediately." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The affluent community of Saguaro Valley lay nestled against the backdrop of Arizona's sun-drenched mountains, a sanctuary of sprawling estates and manicured lawns where families paid premium prices for the promise of safety. 6-foot privacy walls, state-of-the-art security systems, and private patrols created an illusion of impenetrable protection for its residents. This was where Carolyn Thornton had chosen to raise her daughter Madison, believing the sacrifice of her art teacher's salary for a modest home in an expensive zip code was worth her child's security. Madison Maddie, to those who loved her, had been a bright, talkative kindergartner with copper curls and a constellation of freckles across her nose. Her laughter once echoed through their small southwestern-style home like wind chimes catching the desert breeze. That was before the day of silence, before her voice disappeared like water into parched earth. Atlas hadn't always borne the name of someone carrying the weight of the world. The German shepherd had begun life as ranger, loyal companion to Army Sergeant Liam Matthews, who, after 3 tours in Afghanistan, lost his final battle with PTSD. The dog had remained faithfully by his master's side for 3 days after the suicide before authorities found them, renamed and retrained. Atlas became an elite canine officer with an exceptional talent for finding hidden children. His service record included 12 successful rescues from trafficking situations until the raid that nearly claimed his life, 17 stab wounds, a punctured lung, and internal damage that would never fully heal. Judge Eleanor Blackwood presided over the Whitaker case with a particular intensity that few understood. At 58, her salt-and-pepper hair and penetrating blue eyes commanded respect in her courtroom. Only her closest colleagues knew about Claire, her daughter who vanished from their backyard 6 years ago, leaving behind an untouched bicycle and a case that grew colder with each passing season. Blake Whitaker moved through Saguaro Valley like royalty, handsome at 42, with a politician's smile and philanthropist's reputation. His real estate developments had transformed the Phoenix skyline, and his children's foundation had earned him a Protector of Children award displayed prominently in his office. People trusted him instinctively, which was his most valuable asset and most dangerous weapon. The afternoon had been perfect, one of those flawless spring days when the desert blooms painted the landscape with unexpected color. Maddie had been playing in the backyard of their Saguaro Valley home, her favorite stuffed unicorn propped against the trunk of the single mesquite tree that provided precious shade. Carolyn watched from the kitchen window as she prepared lunch, smiling at her daughter's elaborate game involving invisible friends and a tea party arranged with meticulous care. When her phone rang, Carolyn hesitated. The caller ID showed Dr. Parker's office, Maddie's new therapist calling about insurance forms that needed immediate attention. "Just 2 minutes," Carolyn told herself, glancing once more at Maddie safely enclosed behind their security fence. What harm could come in 2 minutes? The conversation stretched to 4 minutes. When Carolyn returned to the window, her heart slammed against her ribs. A man stood at the edge of their property, leaning over the side gate. His suit was impeccable, his smile charismatic as he spoke to Maddie, who had wandered to the fence's edge. Unicorn clutched to her chest, Carolyn was through the back door in seconds. But something in the man's posture changed as he spotted her approach. His friendly demeanor shifted subtly. A predator recalculating. Later, she would remember his words with sickening clarity. "Your daughter mentioned she loves horses. My foundation just received funding for equine therapy for children. I was leaving my card." Recognition clicked. Blake Whitaker, the developer whose billboards dotted Phoenix highways, whose charity galas made front-page news. A man above suspicion. "Madison, come here," Carolyn called. Maternal instinct screaming warnings her conscious mind couldn't yet formulate. Maddie hesitated, looking between her mother and the nice man with pictures of horses on his phone. "I have a very special pony that needs a little girl just like you to take care of him," Whitaker continued smoothly. "He's at my ranch just down the road. Your mom could bring you—" "We're not interested," Carolyn interrupted, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Madison, inside, now." From across the street, retired teacher Margaret Lawson called out, "Everything okay over there, Carolyn?" She stood at her mailbox, keys in hand, her presence suddenly vital. Something dark flashed in Whitaker's eyes there and gone so quickly, Carolyn later questioned if she'd imagined it. He straightened, business smile firmly in place. "Of course. Just discussing the Foundation's work. Another time, perhaps." With a courteous nod, he walked to his gleaming black SUV. That night, Maddie stopped speaking. No explanation, no gradual reduction, her voice simply vanished. The pediatrician suggested trauma response, but Carolyn couldn't understand why. Nothing had happened. The man had only talked to her, yet something had frightened Maddie beyond words. The police report filed the next day was met with barely concealed skepticism. Blake Whitaker, attempting to abduct a child in broad daylight. The same man who donated millions to children's causes. The officer had been apologetic but firm. They needed evidence, not maternal anxiety. 2 weeks of specialists followed. Maddie's silence proved impenetrable. Then Carolyn's friend, a social worker, suggested the animal therapy program at Desert Healing Center. "They have a special dog," she explained. "Something about him connects with traumatized children when nothing else can." The morning they met, Atlas remained etched in Carolyn's memory with crystalline clarity. Dr. Laura Bennett, the center's director, had explained his background with gentle candor while they waited in the sunlit therapy room. "Atlas came to us through tragedy," she'd said. His first owner, Sergeant Matthews, suffered from severe PTSD after his 3rd deployment. when Liam took his own life. Atlas refused to leave his side for 3 days. The bond between them was extraordinary. Dr. Bennett's voice softened. After that, Atlas found his calling in law enforcement. He specialized in finding missing children, had an almost supernatural ability to track them when other dogs failed. Carolyn listened, watching through the observation window as handlers prepared Atlas in the adjoining room. The German Shepherd moved with dignified purpose, despite a noticeable limp. The scar running down his right flank was impossible to miss, even through his thick fur. "What happened to him?" Carolyn asked. 3 years ago, Atlas led a raid on a suspected trafficking operation. He found a hidden room where 3 children were being held. The suspect was waiting attacked Atlas with a hunting knife before officers could intervene. 17 stab wounds. The veterinarians didn't expect him to survive. Carolyn winced. "That's horrible." "The internal damage was permanent. He lives with chronic pain, but you'd never know it from his determination. When he could no longer serve in the field, he was scheduled for euthanasia department. Budgets can't accommodate retired canines with extensive medical needs." Dr. Bennett smiled faintly. "I couldn't let that happen. Not to a hero who'd saved so many children. We adopted him, trained him for therapy work. He's especially effective with traumatized children. Something in him recognizes their pain." When Maddie entered the room, something extraordinary happened. Atlas, who typically approached new children with careful, trained patience, immediately walked to her side and sat, his body angled protectively toward her. The little girl, who had recoiled from every therapist's attempt at connection, stared at the dog with wide, solemn eyes. Minutes passed in silence. Then, slowly, Maddie reached toward Atlas's scar. Dr. Bennett began to intervene. The scar remained sensitive but stopped when she saw Atlas's response. The dog lowered his head, giving permission where he typically allowed no touch. Maddie's small fingers traced the length of the jagged line. Atlas remained perfectly still, his amber eyes never leaving her face. Something passed between them. Recognition between 2 wounded souls that transcended explanation. That session marked the first visible step in Maddie's journey back. Though she still wouldn't speak, she began communicating through nods and hand gestures, but only when Atlas was present. The following weeks established a ritual 3 sessions weekly with Atlas by her side, his steady presence anchoring her in ways human connection couldn't reach. Dr. Bennett developed a system of hand signals Maddie could use with Atlas' simple commands and emotional indicators. The most significant was what they called the safe signal, a subtle gesture that told Atlas when Maddie felt threatened. Upon seeing it, Atlas would shift from therapy dog to protector mode, positioning himself between Maddie and the perceived threat. "We teach this signal only in extreme circumstances," Dr. Bennett explained. "Atlas takes it very seriously. His entire demeanor changes." They never expected Maddie would need to use it. The breakthrough came during their 5th week of sessions. Detective Mason Reynolds, a veteran officer with the Special Victims Unit, requested a meeting with Carolyn. The conversation in Dr. Bennett's office was grim. "We've had another incident," Reynolds explained, his weathered face grave. "A similar approach man offering special horse therapy opportunities. This time he managed to get the child into his vehicle, but a neighbor intervened." Carolyn felt her throat tighten. Was it, "We don't know"? We don't. The description matches thousands of men well-dressed, professional appearance, charismatic. But the approach was nearly identical to what you reported. Reynolds hesitated. "Mrs. Thornton, we need Madison's help. If she could identify the man she spoke with." "She's not speaking," Carolyn reminded him, frustration edging her voice. "And you dismissed my concerns when I first reported it. I understand your anger, but there's a pattern emerging, and your daughter might be the key to preventing another child from disappearing." Dr. Bennett, who had been listening quietly, offered a suggestion. "What if we try with Atlas? Madison communicates through him. Perhaps with his support?" The resulting identification session was conducted with extraordinary care. Photos were arranged in a standard lineup, Whitaker's among 7 similar-looking men. Maddie entered the room with Atlas at her side, her small hand buried in his fur. Reynolds knelt to her eye level. "Madison, do you see the man who talked to you about horses that day?" For several long moments, Maddie stared at the photos, her face expressionless. Then, slowly, she pointed to Whitaker's image. As she did, her other hand made the safe signal at her side. Atlas's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His body stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared at Whitaker's photograph. Dr. Bennett and Reynolds exchanged bewildered glances. "That's unusual," Dr. Bennett murmured. "Atlas is reacting as if the threat is actually present." Reynolds studied the dog with newfound interest. "Where did you say Atlas worked before?" "Special Victims Unit K-9 Division, primarily child trafficking cases. He was nearly killed in a raid 3 years ago." Something shifted in Reynolds' expression. "3 years ago. Do you know which operation?" "The handler information is in his file. The suspect's name was never shared with us, just that he was presumed dead after escaping the scene." Reynolds' face turned grim. "I need to see that file." 3 months after the attempted abduction, the case against Blake Whitaker teetered on the edge of collapse. Despite Detective Reynolds' dogged investigation, the evidence remained frustratingly circumstantial. A child's identification without verbal testimony, a neighbor who'd seen nothing overtly criminal, and a respected businessman whose legal team demolished each fragile connection the prosecution attempted to build. Victoria Hayes, the lead prosecutor, paced her office the night before Maddie's court appearance. Case files spread across her desk in organized chaos, the weight of responsibility evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes. "We're running out of options," she told Reynolds, who sat with a cup of coffee gone cold. "Whitaker's team has painted Madison as a confused child and her mother as an overprotective hysteric. The judge is likely to dismiss after tomorrow's testimony if we can't produce something tangible." Reynolds nodded grimly. "There's still Atlas. The therapy dog." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "The defense will fight his presence tooth and nail." "Let them—" Reynolds leaned forward. "I've been digging into that raid 3 years ago. The suspect who nearly killed Atlas was never found. Blood trail led to the river. Body never recovered. Everyone presumed he drowned." "And you think it was Whitaker?" Hayes looked skeptical. "The raid location was one of Whitaker's properties, a rental under a shell corporation. Took us 3 years to connect the paper trail. and Atlas's reaction to Whitaker's photo wasn't just a therapy dog supporting his charge, it was recognition. Hayes considered this. Even if you're right, we can't exactly put a dog on the witness stand. No, Reynolds agreed. But I've spoken with Dr. Bennett. Atlas provides a unique support that allows Madison to communicate. With him present, she might be able to identify Whitaker directly in court. The defense will object. Let them object. We have documentation from 3 child psychologists confirming Atlas's necessity for Madison's emotional well-being during testimony. Judge Blackwood has already ruled on similar cases in favor of support animals. The next morning, as predicted, Michael Chambers, Whitaker's silver-tongued attorney, launched an immediate objection when Maddie entered the courtroom with Atlas. "Your Honor," Chambers began, his voice carrying precisely the right note of reasonable concern. "While we sympathize with the child's condition, the presence of a police-trained German Shepherd creates undue bias against my client. This animal is not a standard therapy dog, but a former attack-trained canine officer." Judge Blackwood adjusted her glasses, studying the documentation before her. "The animal is retired from police work and certified as a therapy dog. Mr. Chambers, I have statements from Dr. Amelia Parker, the child psychologist, and Dr. Laura Bennett, the animal behaviorist, confirming the necessity of his presence. With all due respect, Your Honor, a large, scarred police dog creates a subconscious association with criminality and danger. The jury will inevitably transfer these impressions to my client." Judge Blackwood's gaze hardened slightly. "Mr. Chambers, I've reviewed the psychological assessments. Madison Thornton has been diagnosed with severe selective mutism following trauma. Atlas's presence is not decorative. It's necessary for her to function in this environment." Objection overruled. As Maddie settled into the witness chair, Atlas positioned himself precisely at her feet, his posture alert but calm. Across the courtroom, Blake Whitaker maintained his composed facade, though those watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible shift in his breathing. Victoria Hayes approached the witness stand with gentle, measured steps. "Hello, Madison. Thank you for coming today. I know this is difficult, but you're being very brave." She smiled warmly. "Do you remember me? We met at Dr. Bennett's office?" Maddie nodded slightly, one hand dropping to rest on Atlas's head. "Good. I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened in your backyard. You can answer by nodding or shaking your head if you don't want to speak. Is that okay?" Another small nod. "Madison, is the man who came to your backyard and talked to you about horses in this courtroom today?" The courtroom fell silent. Maddie's eyes slowly scanned the room before stopping on Whitaker. Her hand tightened visibly in Atlas's fur. She nodded. "Can you point to that person?" Maddie's small arm extended, finger aimed directly at Whitaker, who maintained his expression of benign concern. "Let the record show the witness has identified the defendant, Blake Whitaker." Hayes stated, "Madison, did this man ask you to go somewhere with him?" Maddie nodded. "Did he say he had animals somewhere else he wanted to show you?" Another nod. Chambers rose. "Objection, Your Honor. Leading the witness." Sustained. Counsel will rephrase. Hayes nodded. "Madison, did the man tell you anything about where he wanted to take you?" Maddie's free hand formed a gesture, fingers curled into what appeared to be a small horse shape. She nodded. She's indicating he mentioned horses. Hayes clarified for the record. Madison, did this make you feel scared? Maddie hesitated, then made a small sideways gesture with her hand, not quite yes, not quite no. Did you feel scared later? A definite nod. Can you tell us why you became scared? Maddie's face clouded. Her breathing quickened slightly. Hayes looked concerned. It's okay. Madison, you don't have to answer that if it's too difficult. What happened next stunned the courtroom. Maddie's right hand, partially hidden by her side, made a subtle movement, fingers splayed, then closing into a loose fist. It was the safe signal, visible only to those directly facing her. Atlas's transformation was immediate and extraordinary. The calm therapy dog vanished, replaced by an alert, intensely focused animal. His ears pricked forward, body tensing as a low, rumbling growl emerged from deep in his chest. Most strikingly, his gaze locked onto Whitaker with laser precision, tracking him as if nothing else in the room existed. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Blackwood leaned forward, brow furrowed in concentration. "Control your animal, please," Chambers demanded, rising to his feet. But Atlas wasn't lunging or barking. He remained in perfect position, his behavior controlled yet undeniably altered. His focus on Whitaker never wavered. "Your Honor," Hayes began, but Judge Blackwood raised her hand. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," she announced, her voice cutting through the growing whispers. "Counsel for both sides in my chambers immediately." As the courtroom cleared, Reynolds approached Dr. Bennett, who had been observing from the back row. "What just happened?" he asked quietly. Bennett's expression was puzzled. Madison gave him the safe signal. It tells Atlas she feels threatened and needs protection. But his response was far more intense than I've ever seen in training. That wasn't just protective behavior. That was recognition. In her chambers, Judge Blackwood faced both legal teams with uncommon intensity. Would someone care to explain what we just witnessed? Chambers jumped in first. A theatrical display clearly designed to prejudice the jury. This animal should be removed immediately. "Ms. Hayes." Blackwood turned to the prosecutor. "Your Honor, we were as surprised as everyone by Atlas's reaction. He's never behaved this way in any session with Madison." Detective Reynolds cleared his throat. "Judge, there may be a connection we weren't aware of until recently. Atlas was seriously injured during a raid on a trafficking operation 3 years ago. The property was owned by a shell corporation we've now traced back to Whitaker Developments." Judge Blackwood's expression remained neutral, though something flickered behind her eyes. "Are you suggesting the dog recognizes the defendant from a previous encounter?" "It's possible. The suspect who attacked Atlas was never apprehended, presumed dead after escaping. No clear identification was ever made." Chambers scoffed. "This is absurd. You're attributing human reasoning to an animal's behavior. My client has never been charged with any such crime, and there is absolutely no evidence connecting him to whatever incident the detective is referencing." Judge Blackwood studied them all silently for a long moment. "Mr. Chambers, your objection regarding the dog's presence is still overruled. However," she turned to Hayes, The jury will be instructed not to draw conclusions from the animal's behavior. This is not canine evidence. This is a support animal for a traumatized child. She straightened. Decision made. Detective Reynolds, I want a complete report on this previous case on my desk by tomorrow morning. Ms. Hayes, continue your questioning, but be aware I'm watching very carefully for any attempt to use the dog's reactions to influence the jury. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Atlas remained by Maddie's side, his demeanor once again calm but alert. Hayes continued her careful questioning, establishing the timeline of events without referencing Atlas's earlier reaction. Chambers's cross-examination was deliberately gentle, a strategy to appear sympathetic while undermining Maddie's credibility. Madison, I know this is difficult, he began with practiced concern. I just have a few questions. You pointed to Mr. Whitaker as the man who spoke to you. Have you seen pictures of Mr. Whitaker since that day? Perhaps on television or in newspapers? Maddie nodded hesitantly. Have the police shown you pictures of Mr. Whitaker? Another nod. Many times. Chambers pressed. Maddie shrugged slightly. Uncertain. Your Honor, Hayes interjected. The witness has already identified the defendant. This line of questioning serves only to confuse a 6-year-old child. I'm establishing the reliability of the identification. Your Honor. Chambers countered smoothly. Proceed, but be mindful of the witness's age, Judge Blackwood instructed. Chambers turned back to Maddie. Madison, sometimes we think we remember things a certain way because we've seen pictures later. Do you understand? Maddie's brow furrowed slightly. She made no response. Let me ask differently. Are you absolutely certain the man you saw that day is Mr. Whitaker, and not someone who looks similar? At this, something changed in Maddie's expression, a flicker of distress that transformed quickly to resolve. Slowly, deliberately, she made the safe signal again. This time, Atlas's reaction was even more pronounced. He rose to his feet, body rigid with attention. The growl deeper and more insistent. His eyes never left Whitaker. Judge Blackwood's gavel came down sharply. Court is adjourned for the day. Jury is instructed to disregard the animal's behavior. We will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. As the courtroom emptied, Detective Reynolds watched Whitaker carefully, for just a moment, as he passed Atlas. Reynolds caught at a flash of genuine fear in the defendant's eyes, quickly masked behind his confident exterior. Something had shifted in the case. The connection between Atlas, Maddie, and Whitaker had opened a door that couldn't be closed again. Reynolds felt it with certainty. They were no longer hunting in the dark. Detective Mason Reynolds spread the aging case files across his desk, the harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct creating shadows in the late evening hours. 3 years of dust had settled on the Operation Playground documents, a raid that had successfully rescued 3 children, but ended with a key suspect escaping and a decorated canine officer nearly dying from his wounds. Reynolds studied the crime scene photos with fresh eyes, looking for what they might have missed. You really think Whitaker was there? Lieutenant Garcia asked, leaning against the doorframe. Reynolds nodded without looking up. Atlas's reaction wasn't random. That dog recognized Whitaker's scent. 17 stab wounds would create a memory even a human wouldn't forget, let alone a dog with senses thousands of times more sensitive than ours. The defense will say it's coincidence. Maybe. Reynolds pulled out a property deed. But this wasn't. The warehouse was owned by Cascade Holdings, which we've now traced through 3 shell companies back to Whitaker Developments. Blake Whitaker is connected to that property. Garcia sighed. Connected doesn't mean present. His lawyers will say he owns dozens of properties he never visits. Then explain this. Reynolds slid across a photo. Crime scene techs collected partial boot prints, size 12, Italian leather with a distinctive wear pattern on the heel. We just executed a warrant on Whitaker's residence yesterday. He placed another photo alongside the first. Same boot, same wear pattern. 3 years later, he kept the damn boots. Garcia straightened. That puts him at the scene. Potentially. But we need more. Reynolds rubbed his tired eyes. The surviving victims from that raid were too traumatized to provide clear identifications. 2 have since been adopted internationally. And the third, he hesitated. The third committed suicide last year, 16 years old. The lieutenant's expression darkened. So Atlas is our only living witness from that night? Technically, yes, but he's a dog, not a person. We need something concrete: DNA, fingerprints, something that will stand up in court. What about the soil samples from Whitaker's SUV? Reynolds nodded. Labs rushing the analysis. Preliminary results show mineral content consistent with the Sonoran Desert northeast of the city. Whitaker claims he was at a development site, but his company has no active projects in that area. Get a search warrant for whatever's out there. Already filed. Judge Blackwood is reviewing it now. As they spoke, across town in her chambers, Judge Eleanor Blackwood studied the warrant application with meticulous attention. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she turned each page. The weight of the decision before her compounded by personal ghosts she fought daily to keep at bay. 6 years since Claire disappeared. 6 years of birthdays marked only by fresh flowers on an empty grave. The photograph on her desk showed a smiling 10-year-old with her mother's eyes and her father's determined chin. Eleanor touched it briefly, then returned to the warrant. The evidence was thin soil samples, boot prints from years ago. A dog's reaction. Normally not enough. But together they created a mosaic that even her judicial caution couldn't ignore. The location in question was remote desert property owned by another Whitaker shell company. No development permits had ever been filed. Eleanor thought of Madison Thornton on the witness stand, small, silent, but unwaveringly certain in her identification. She thought of Atlas's immediate, visceral reaction to Whitaker. Some instincts transcended human reason. Her pen hovered over the signature line as doubt crept in. Was she allowing her personal tragedy to influence her judicial responsibility? The defense would certainly argue so if they knew about Claire. Eleanor set her jaw and signed. Whatever her personal feelings, the evidence met the threshold. Let the investigation proceed. She would recuse herself if necessary, but not before justice had a chance to find its path. Meanwhile, at the Thornton home, Carolyn sat beside Maddie's bed, stroking her daughter's copper curls as she finally drifted to sleep. Atlas lay on the floor beside them, his vigilant presence a comfort to them both. The day in court had drained Maddie completely, leaving her pale and exhausted. "You were so brave today," Carolyn whispered, though her daughter was already asleep. A soft knock at the doorframe drew her attention. Dr. Amelia Parker stood there, elegant in her tailored suit despite the late hour. The child psychologist had arrived shortly after they returned home, concerned about Maddie's emotional state after the courtroom ordeal. "How is she?" Parker asked softly. "Finally sleeping." Carolyn stood, carefully extracting her hand from Maddie's grip. "Thank you for coming. Today was intense." Parker nodded sympathetically as they moved into the hallway. "The courtroom can be traumatizing even for adults. Madison showed remarkable resilience." Something about the psychologist's perfectly modulated concern struck Carolyn as odd. Atlas apparently felt it too. The German shepherd had risen to follow them, his body language subtly shifting as Parker moved closer to Carolyn. "I noticed something concerning during today's proceedings," Parker continued. "Madison's signal to Atlas seemed almost rehearsed. Has someone been coaching her?" Carolyn frowned. "Coaching her, Dr. Bennett taught her signals to communicate with Atlas during therapy. It's how they connect." "Of course," Parker smiled reassuringly. "I only wonder if those signals might be misinterpreted in court. The defense could argue she's been taught to implicate Mr. Whitaker specifically." "That's ridiculous. Maddie identified him because he's the man who tried to take her." Parker's expression remained perfectly composed. "I understand your conviction, Carolyn. I'm simply concerned about Madison's recovery. These proceedings, this focus on Mr. Whitaker, it might be reinforcing her trauma rather than helping her process it." Carolyn felt a flicker of unease. "What are you suggesting?" "Perhaps we should consider alternatives. Madison could provide written testimony instead of appearing in court again, or we could explore whether her identification is absolutely necessary to the case." Before Carolyn could respond, Atlas moved between them, his body oriented toward Parker, head lowered slightly. Not aggressive, but unmistakably protective. Parker eyed the dog with barely concealed distaste. "The animal seems overly reactive. Has he always been this way around your visitors?" "Only when he senses something's wrong," Carolyn replied, studying the psychologist with new wariness. Parker's smile tightened fractionally. "I should go. We can discuss this more at our next session. For now, make sure Madison gets plenty of rest. These proceedings are taking a toll on her, whether she shows it or not." After the psychologist left, Carolyn locked the door with unusual care, then returned to Maddie's room. Atlas had already resumed his position beside the bed, but his alertness suggested he hadn't dismissed whatever had concerned him about Dr. Tetcha Parker. Carolyn took out her phone and called Detective Reynolds. "Mrs. Thornton." His voice carried surprise at the late call. "Something strange just happened with Dr. Parker," Carolyn began, keeping her voice low. She seemed almost concerned that Maddie was identifying Whitaker. She suggested we find ways to avoid further testimony. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. "That's interesting," Reynolds finally said, his tone carefully neutral. "Dr. Parker was the one who provided the strongest psychological assessment supporting Atlas's presence in court." "Yes. And now she seems concerned about it. Has she ever met Atlas before today?" Carolyn thought back. "No. She's only worked with Maddie at her office. Atlas stays with Dr. Bennett when he's not with Maddie. And how did Atlas react to her tonight? Protective. Not aggressive, but watchful, the way he was in court with Whitaker, but less intense. Another pause. "Mrs. Thornton, I don't want to alarm you, but I'd like you to be extra cautious. Don't discuss the case with Dr. Parker anymore. In fact, it might be best to cancel your next appointment." "You think she's involved somehow?" "I think we should verify her credentials more thoroughly. Dr. Parker came highly recommended, but I'd like to know by whom." The next morning, court proceedings resumed with a subtly altered atmosphere. Hayes approached the bench before the jury entered, her expression grave. "Your Honor, we have concerns about potential witness tampering. Dr. Amelia Parker visited the Thornton home last night and appeared to discourage further testimony from Madison." Judge Blackwood's gaze sharpened. "That's a serious accusation, Counselor. We're investigating. Your Honor, in the meantime, we request Madison's testimony be completed today with minimal interruption." Chambers immediately objected. "This is absurd. Your Honor, Dr. Parker is a respected child psychologist who has Madison's best interest at heart. If she suggested limiting court appearances, it was for the child's welfare." "Nevertheless," Blackwood ruled, "Madison will complete her testimony today. Mr. Chambers, you will limit your cross-examination to essential questions appropriate for a 6-year-old witness." When Maddie took the stand again, Atlas by her side, Hayes kept her questioning straightforward. Maddie responded with nods, headshakes, and occasional hand gestures that Dr. Bennett interpreted. The child appeared more confident than the previous day, though still silent. Chambers' cross-examination was notably subdued, a tactical retreat rather than risk alienating the jury through aggressive questioning of a sympathetic child. Throughout the testimony, Whitaker maintained his composed facade, though observers noted he never looked directly at Atlas. As Madison's testimony concluded, Hayes called her final witness of the day, Dr. Laura Bennett. "Dr. Bennett, please explain Atlas's training and capabilities to the court." Hayes began. Bennett, professional in a simple Navy suit, described Atlas's background, his specialized training for detecting hidden children, and his remarkable success rate. "In your professional opinion," Hayes continued, "how would you interpret Atlas's reaction to the defendant yesterday?" Chambers objected immediately. "Calls for speculation. The witness cannot know what an animal is thinking. I'm asking for her expert assessment based on her knowledge of this specific animal's training and behavior patterns," Hayes countered. Judge Blackwood overruled the objection, allowing Bennett to answer. "Atlas is trained to remain calm in all circumstances unless given specific commands or signals," Bennett explained. "His reaction yesterday was consistent with recognition of a specific threat, not general protectiveness. In my professional experience, such a reaction typically indicates the animal has encountered the person before in a threatening context." "Could you elaborate on the distinction?" Hayes prompted. "Certainly. Protection dogs are trained to respond to behavioral cues, aggressive movements, threatening postures. Atlas wasn't responding to anything Mr. Whitaker was doing. He was responding to who Mr. Whitaker is. That suggests prior knowledge." Chambers rose for cross-examination, his approach calculated to undermine Bennett's expertise. "Dr. Bennett, you're a veterinarian who works with therapy animals, correct? Not a legal expert on evidence or criminal identification." "I have specialized training in animal behavior and forensic veterinary medicine," Bennett replied evenly. "I've consulted on multiple cases involving animal evidence, but you can't actually know what Atlas was thinking or what prompted his reaction. Can you?" I can interpret his behavior based on established patterns and training responses. It's not different from how we interpret any nonverbal communication. So it's ultimately subjective, isn't it? Your interpretation versus another expert's. Bennett didn't take the bait. All behavioral analysis has subjective elements, whether for humans or animals. That doesn't make it invalid. As the testimony continued, Detective Reynolds slipped quietly from the courtroom. The search warrant for Whitaker's desert property had been approved, and a team was assembling. They had 36 hours before they needed to report back to Judge Blackwood. The Sonoran Desert stretched endlessly under the merciless afternoon sun, its beauty and danger equally apparent as the search team's vehicles bumped along a barely visible dirt track. Reynolds checked the GPS coordinates again, confirming they were approaching the property identified in the warrant. "Nothing out here but rattlesnakes and cactus," Officer Wilson commented from the driver's seat. "Perfect place to hide something you don't want found." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Or someone." In the back seat, Atlas sat alert, his eyes scanning the landscape through the window. Dr. Bennett had advocated strongly for his inclusion in the search. His training in finding hidden victims could prove invaluable in such vast terrain. "There." Reynolds pointed as a structure appeared on the horizon. "Single-story building. Looks like a hunting cabin." As they approached, the building's neglected state became apparent. Weathered wood siding, shuttered windows, a sagging porch that had seen better days. Nothing about it suggested regular use, yet the area immediately surrounding the cabin was suspiciously clear of the desert growth that should have encroached over time. Someone maintained this place. The team secured the perimeter before approaching the structure. Atlas strained at his leash, his behavior shifting from alert to intensely focused, the change unmistakable to those who worked with search dogs. "He's got something," Bennett confirmed quietly. "This isn't curiosity, this is detection behavior." The cabin's interior revealed little at first glance: sparse furnishings, a layer of dust suggesting infrequent use, a small kitchenette with empty cabinets. But Atlas wasn't interested in any of this. He led Bennett directly to a faded rug in the center of the main room, pawing insistently at its edge. Reynolds knelt, pulling back the rug to reveal wooden floorboards. Unlike the weathered planks throughout the rest of the cabin, these appeared newer, their color slightly mismatched. "Bring the crowbar," he ordered, already searching for an edge to leverage. The hidden trapdoor opened with surprising ease, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The dank smell that rose from below caused several officers to step back involuntarily. Atlas whined, pulling toward the stairs with determination that overrode his usual discipline. "He's catching a scent," Bennett explained. "Human scent." Reynolds unholstered his weapon. "Wilson? Garcia? With me?" "The rest secure the perimeter." "Doctor?" "Bennett. Keep Atlas here until we clear it." The descent into the underground space felt like crossing a threshold between worlds. The staircase led to a concrete hallway illuminated only by the officers' flashlights, their beams cutting through heavy darkness to reveal a series of metal doors along one side. The first two rooms contained only bare mattresses, chains bolted to the walls, and the lingering evidence of long-term captivity. The third door was different, newer, with a sophisticated electronic lock that seemed jarringly modern in the primitive space. "Get the battering ram," Reynolds ordered, his instincts screaming that whatever lay beyond couldn't wait for technical specialists. The door gave way on the third strike. metal shrieking as it bent inward. Reynolds entered first, weapon raised, flashlight illuminating the scene in stark clarity. A small figure huddled in the corner, arms wrapped protectively around drawn-up knees. Blonde hair hung in tangled curtains around a pale, dirt-smudged face. Eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, squinted against the sudden light. "Police," Reynolds announced, lowering his weapon slightly. "You're safe now." The girl, perhaps 8 or 9, didn't move, her expression suggesting she'd heard such promises before. Reynolds holstered his weapon and knelt, maintaining distance. "My name is Detective Reynolds. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" Seconds stretched into a full minute of silence before the girl spoke, her voice raspy from disuse. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Sullivan." Reynolds felt his heart rate quicken. Emma Sullivan had been missing for 6 months, abducted from a shopping mall in Scottsdale while her mother used the restroom. Her case had generated national headlines before fading into the statistical obscurity that haunted most long-term missing children cases. "Emma, we're going to get you out of here. Okay, is there anyone else down here with you?" She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." The implication in those 2 words chilled him. "Did you see who brought you here?" Emma's gaze dropped to the floor. "The nice man," she murmured. "He has different faces. Different faces. Sometimes he's angry. Sometimes he pretends to be nice. But his eyes never change." She looked up suddenly. "Is he gone? Really gone?" "He's not here," Reynolds assured her. "You're safe now." As they prepared to move Emma, Reynolds noticed something half hidden beneath the thin mattress where she'd been sitting, a small pink backpack, its once bright color now faded and stained. The name embroidered on the front stopped his breath entirely. Claire Blackwood, back at the courthouse. Hayes received Reynolds' preliminary report via text message during the afternoon recess. The discovery of Emma Sullivan, alive but traumatized, immediately altered the trajectory of the case. Judge Blackwood ordered a private briefing in her chambers, away from the press that had begun gathering as rumors spread. "Emma Sullivan is receiving medical attention," Hayes explained. "Initial examination shows signs of long-term captivity, but no life-threatening injuries. She's severely malnourished and dehydrated." Judge Blackwood maintained her professional composure. "And the connection to Whitaker, the property is owned by one of his shell companies. Security cameras at the nearest gas station show his vehicle passing through the area multiple times over the past 6 months, coinciding with Emma's captivity." Chambers, looking increasingly uncomfortable, attempted to maintain his defense. "Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker has development interests throughout the region. His presence in the area proves nothing about his knowledge of this unfortunate situation." "There's more," Hayes continued. "Among the items recovered was a backpack belonging to another missing child, Claire Blackwood." The color drained from Judge Blackwood's face. For a moment, her judicial mask slipped, revealing the mother beneath. "Claire," she whispered. Hayes nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. We believe this evidence creates a direct conflict of interest. You may wish to recuse yourself from further proceedings." Judge Blackwood sat perfectly still, absorbing the information with the disciplined control that had defined her career. When she spoke, Her voice carried the weight of both personal anguish and professional duty. "I am recusing myself, effective immediately. Judge Martin will take over the case." She rose, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "The court will adjourn until tomorrow morning to accommodate this transition." As she left the chambers, Eleanor Blackwood walked with the rigid posture of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. 6 years of uncertainty had just crystallized into the worst possible answer, yet the revelation brought a terrible clarity. Claire was gone, but perhaps other children might be saved. Outside, the media frenzy had already begun. Emma Sullivan's rescue would dominate headlines by evening, and Blake Whitaker's carefully constructed public image was beginning to crumble under the weight of mounting evidence. His attorney's phone rang constantly as they scrambled to develop a new strategy. In the midst of this chaos, Maddie Thornton sat quietly in a secure witness room, Atlas's head resting on her lap as she stroked his fur with mechanical regularity. The events unfolding around her remained largely unknown to the child, but she sensed the shift in energy, the current of urgency that flowed through the adults who entered and exited the room. Dr. Bennett watched them from the doorway, struck by the tableau they created, the silent child and loyal dog, connected by invisible threads of shared trauma and healing. Whatever happened next in the courtroom, that bond had already accomplished something remarkable. It had given a voice to the voiceless and set truth in motion. The courtroom hummed with tension as Judge Robert Martin took his place on the bench. The overnight transition from Judge Blackwood had fueled speculation, and the gallery overflowed with journalists and spectators drawn by rumors of a breakthrough in the case. Blake Whitaker sat at the defense table, his previously immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of strain, a loosened tie, shadows beneath his eyes, fingernails bitten to the quick. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Robert Martin presiding in the matter of Arizona versus Whitaker." Judge Martin, a stern-faced veteran of the bench with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes, addressed the courtroom. "In light of recent developments, this court will hear new evidence before proceeding. The jury has been sequestered to prevent exposure to media coverage. Ms. Hayes, you may proceed." Victoria Hayes approached the bench with measured confidence. "Your Honor, the state calls Detective Mason Reynolds." Reynolds took the stand, his weathered face grave as he recounted the discovery at the desert property, the hidden underground rooms, the conditions of captivity, and most significantly, the rescue of Emma Sullivan. "Detective Reynolds," Hayes continued, "please explain the connection between this property and the defendant." "The property is owned by Coyote Basin Holdings, which our financial investigation has confirmed is a shell corporation created by Whitaker Developments. Mr. Whitaker is the sole beneficial owner. And what evidence places Mr. Whitaker himself at this location?" Security footage from a gas station 5 miles from the property shows Mr. Whitaker's vehicle passing through on 17 separate occasions over the past 6 months. Cell phone records confirm his phone connecting to towers in that remote area during the same time frames. Michael Chambers rose immediately. "Objection. Your Honor, Detective Reynolds is presenting circumstantial evidence without context. My client owns multiple development properties in that region. His presence proves nothing about any alleged criminal activity." "Your Honor," Hayes countered, "the pattern of visits correlates precisely with Emma Sullivan's captivity. Furthermore, there are no development projects, pending permits, or business activities that would explain Mr. Whitaker's regular presence at this remote location. Judge Martin considered briefly. Objection overruled. The jury will determine the weight of this evidence. Continue. Ms. Hayes. Detective Reynolds, what else was discovered at the property? Reynolds hesitated, aware of the impact his next statement would have. We recovered personal items belonging to multiple missing children, including a backpack identified as belonging to Claire Blackwood, who disappeared 6 years ago. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Everyone present knew Judge Blackwood's recusal now made tragic sense. Were forensic tests conducted at the scene? Yes. Preliminary DNA analysis confirmed Emma Sullivan's presence in the underground rooms. We also found DNA from at least 3 other individuals. Full results are still pending, but initial matches include Claire Blackwood and 2 other missing children from cases spanning the past decade. The testimony continued, building a damning picture of the evidence discovered at the property. Throughout, Whitaker maintained his composure, though his attorney appeared increasingly concerned, passing notes and whispering urgently. When Reynolds stepped down, Hayes called her next witness. The state calls Emma Sullivan. The courtroom doors opened to reveal a small, fragile-looking child accompanied by a victim advocate. Emma's blonde hair had been washed and neatly braided, but nothing could disguise the haunted look in her eyes or the way her thin shoulders hunched defensively as she approached the witness stand. Judge Martin addressed her gently. Emma, I know this is difficult. You're very brave to be here today. Do you understand what it means to tell the truth in court? Emma nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. It means saying what really happened, even if it's scary. That's right. Can you do that for us today? I think so. Her voice was barely audible. Hayes approached carefully. Her manner softened for the traumatized child. Emma, I'm going to ask you about what happened when you were taken from the mall. Is that okay? Emma nodded, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse. Can you tell us who took you? Emma's gaze flickered briefly toward Whitaker before returning to Hayes. The nice man, she whispered. He said my mom sent him to find me. Did the nice man tell you his name? He said his name was Mr. Blake. He showed me a picture of horses on his phone and said my mom had arranged a special surprise. The courtroom fell silent as Emma recounted her abduction, how Whitaker had approached her outside the mall restrooms, claiming her mother had sent him, how he'd led her to his car with promises of a special horse riding experience, how she'd only realized something was wrong when they drove past the highway exit toward her home. What happened when you realized something was wrong? Hayes asked gently. Emma's voice trembled. I asked to call my mom. He got very angry. His face changed. He wasn't nice anymore. Emma, is the man who took you in this courtroom today? The child's breathing quickened. She nodded. Can you point to him? Slowly. Emma raised her arm and pointed directly at Blake Whitaker. That's him? That's Mr. Blake. Whitaker's expression remained unchanged, but those watching closely noted the slight whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the edge of the table. Hayes continued with careful questions about Emma's captivity, the underground room, the periodic visits from Whitaker, the other children she had glimpsed during her time there. Throughout her testimony, Emma's voice remained small but clear, her recollection precise in the way traumatic memories often are sharp-edged and indelible. Chambers' cross-examination was deliberately minimal. Aware that aggressive questioning of the traumatized child would only damage his client's case further, he focused instead on minor inconsistencies in timing and details, avoiding any questions that might provoke an emotional response. After Emma was escorted from the courtroom, Hayes called for a short recess before her final witness. The strategy was clear: build momentum with the most powerful testimony last. When court resumed, Hayes addressed Judge Martin. "Your Honor, the state calls Madison Thornton," accompanied by her therapy dog, Atlas. Maddie entered with Atlas at her side, the German shepherd moving with alert protectiveness that had become familiar to the courtroom. They took their position at the witness stand, Maddie's small hand resting on Atlas's head for reassurance. "Madison," Hayes began gently, "thank you for coming back today. I just have a few more questions for you." Maddie nodded, her solemn gaze fixed on the prosecutor. "Yesterday, you identified Mr. Whitaker as the man who came to your yard. Today, I want to ask you about Atlas. Has he ever reacted to anyone else the way he reacted to Mr. Whitaker?" Maddie shook her head decisively. "Madison, Dr. Bennett taught you special signals to use with Atlas. Is that right?" A nod. "Can you show us the signal you used yesterday when Atlas became alert?" Maddie hesitated, then made a subtle gesture with her right hand, fingers splayed, then closed into a loose fist. "Thank you. Can you tell us, using gestures if you prefer, what that signal means?" Maddie pointed to Atlas, then wrapped her arms around herself in a protective hug. Hayes nodded, understanding. "The signal tells Atlas you need protection," a confirming nod. "Madison, I'd like to try something, if you're comfortable. Dr. Bennett has suggested that Atlas might be able to show us something important about Mr. Whitaker. Would you be willing to give Atlas a special command?" Chambers rose immediately. "Objection! Your Honor, this is highly irregular and potentially prejudicial." Judge Martin considered the objection. "Ms. Hayes, please approach and explain what you're proposing." At the bench, Hayes outlined her request. "Dr. Bennett has identified a trained command that could demonstrate how Atlas was injured 3 years ago. If Atlas recognizes Whitaker as his attacker, this could provide compelling corroboration of the connection." "This is absurd," Chambers protested. "You're essentially asking a dog to testify." Judge Martin's expression remained thoughtful. "I'll allow it, but with strict parameters. The jury will be instructed that this is a demonstration, not evidence. Mr. Whitaker will remain seated at the defense table. If the animal shows any signs of aggression, the demonstration ends immediately." Returning to the witness stand, Hayes addressed Maddie. "Madison, Dr. Bennett says Atlas knows a command called Show Me. Can you give Atlas that command while pointing to Mr. Whitaker?" Maddie looked uncertain, her gaze shifting to Atlas, then back to Hayes. "It's okay if you don't want to," Hayes assured her. "This is completely your choice." Something resolved in Maddie's expression. She turned to Atlas, made a gesture like opening a book, and pointed toward Whitaker. The transformation in Atlas was immediate and extraordinary. The German shepherd moved away from Maddie, his body language shifting dramatically. He turned his right side toward the courtroom, lowered himself slightly, and began a precise reenactment, the stalking approach of a search dog following a scent, the alert posture upon discovery, and then, most strikingly, the defensive recoil as he flinched away from an invisible attack. His right flank exposed exactly where his scar ran. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Atlas completed the demonstration. Returning to Maddie's side, with military precision, the message was unmistakable. Atlas was showing exactly how he had received his injury. Whitaker's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, rising halfway from his seat. "It's just a trained animal performing tricks." The outburst triggered something unexpected. Atlas turned sharply toward Whitaker, his attention locked on the defendant with laser focus. A low, rumbling growl emerged from deep in his chest. Not aggression, but recognition and warning. More significantly, Maddie's expression changed. Her eyes widened as she stared at Whitaker, something clicking into place in her young mind. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time since the attempted abduction, she spoke. "Bad man," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse but clear enough to be heard in the silent courtroom. "You hurt Atlas." The simple statement rippled through the room like an electric current. Hayes froze, knowing better than to interrupt this unexpected breakthrough. Maddie continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I saw your picture in Dr. Bennett's office with Atlas before." Dr. Bennett, seated in the gallery, let out a small gasp of realization. In her office hung a wall of honor photographs of successful rescues, including newspaper clippings from the Operation Playground raid 3 years earlier. The suspect's face had been blurred in the public photos, but Atlas's heroism had been celebrated. Maddie had been studying those photos for weeks. "You tried to take me," Maddie continued, her focus entirely on Whitaker now. "Like you took the other kids." Whitaker's face contorted, the carefully maintained facade finally collapsing. "The dog is lying," he shouted, his voice unrecognizable with rage. "It's impossible I killed that dog." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Martin's gavel cracked repeatedly as he called for order. Chambers grabbed Whitaker's arm, desperately trying to silence him. But the damage was done. The outburst caught on the official court record was a confession no jury could ignore. As bailiffs moved to restrain Whitaker, Atlas positioned himself protectively in front of Maddie, his training overriding everything except the need to shield his charge. The German shepherd's stance was powerful but controlled, a living barrier between the child and the threat. Through the commotion, Detective Reynolds noticed something alarming. Atlas's protective posture suddenly faltered, a momentary weakness as his right leg seemed to give way. The dog recovered instantly, but Reynolds saw what others missed, a small dark stain spreading on the courtroom floor beneath Atlas. The German shepherd was bleeding. Whatever internal damage Atlas had suffered 3 years ago, the stress and exertion of the demonstration had reopened old wounds, yet he remained steadfast at his post, ignoring his own distress to fulfill his protective duty. As court officers escorted the jury out and secured Whitaker, Dr. Bennett rushed forward, her experienced eye immediately assessing Atlas's condition. Her face paled as she knelt beside him. "He needs emergency veterinary care," she told Reynolds urgently. "Right now." Maddie, sensing something was wrong, placed her small hand on Atlas's head. "Atlas?" she questioned, the newfound voice already thick with concern. Her fingers came away red with blood. "Don't die, Atlas," she pleaded, suddenly frantic. "I need you." The emergency veterinary hospital buzzed with controlled urgency as Atlas was rushed through double doors on a gurney, his powerful body suddenly looking vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dr. Bennett followed alongside, rattling off vital information to the veterinary team, his medical history, the previous injuries, the symptoms she'd observed in the courtroom. Behind them came Maddie, refusing to be separated from Atlas despite her mother's gentle attempts to hold her back. "He needs me," she insisted, her newly recovered voice raw with emotion. It was the longest sentence she'd spoken in months. Carolyn met Reynolds' gaze over her daughter's head, a silent question passing between them. The detective nodded almost imperceptibly. 5 minutes, the lead veterinarian conceded. Then he goes into surgery, and you'll need to wait outside. The examination room was a flurry of activity as veterinary technicians prepared Atlas for emergency surgery. IV lines were placed, monitoring equipment attached, preliminary scans ordered. Through it all, Maddie stood at the head of the table, her small hand resting on Atlas's muzzle, her eyes never leaving his. His internal scarring is extensive. The veterinarian murmured to Dr. Bennett, studying the hastily performed ultrasound. "There's active bleeding. Looks like he's ruptured adhesions from his previous injuries." "How did this happen?" "Courtroom demonstration," Bennett replied quietly. "He was showing how he was attacked 3 years ago." The veterinarian's eyebrows rose. "The K-9 officer from the trafficking case." "That was this dog," Bennett nodded. "And today he identified his attacker. The same man who tried to take Maddie." Understanding dawned on the veterinarian's face. She glanced at the little girl, whispering reassurances to the injured shepherd. "We'll do everything we can. His history makes him high risk for surgery, but we have no choice." As the team prepared to move Atlas to the operating room, Maddie leaned close to his ear. "You have to fight," she whispered fiercely. "Like you fought before. I just found my voice. You can't leave now." Atlas's amber eyes, clouded with pain, but still alert, fixed on Maddie's face. His tail managed a single weak thump against the table. "Time to go, sweetheart," Carolyn said gently, pulling Maddie back as the veterinary team wheeled Atlas away. They need to help him now. The waiting room became their prison for the next several hours. Carolyn sat with Maddie curled against her side, the child alternating between long silences and sudden bursts of questions, each sentence a miracle after months of mutism. "Will Atlas die?" she asked, her voice small in the sterile room. Carolyn stroked her daughter's copper curls. "The doctors are doing everything they can. Atlas is very strong." "He got hurt because of me," Maddie whispered, "because I asked him to show." "No, sweetheart. Atlas got hurt a long time ago, trying to save other children. What happened today, he was very brave, just like you were." Detective Reynolds arrived an hour into the surgery, his face grim with exhaustion but his eyes bright with purpose. He knelt in front of Maddie. "How's our hero doing?" he asked gently. "They're fixing him," Maddie replied, the simplicity of her statement belying the complexity of her emotions. Reynolds nodded. "Madison, I wanted to tell you something important. What you and Atlas did today, it was amazing. Because of you two. Mr. Whitaker can't hurt any more children." Maddie considered this. "Did they arrest the bad doctor too?" Reynolds blinked in surprise. "The bad doctor Dr. Parker. She told me not to talk." Maddie's face scrunched in concentration. "She said if I told anyone about the bad man, my mommy would get sick and die." Carolyn gasped, her arm tightening around Maddie's shoulders. "What?" Reynolds' expression hardened. "Madison, are you saying Dr. Parker knew about Mr. Whitaker?" Maddie nodded solemnly. "She showed me pictures of him being nice to kids, said he was a good man who helped children, but when I saw his real face at our fence, I got scared. After that, she made me look at a special watch and told me I couldn't talk anymore." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She said every word I spoke would make Mommy sicker." Reynolds and Carolyn exchanged horrified glances. The detective pulled out his phone immediately, stepping away to issue urgent orders to his team. The implications were staggering. Amelia Parker hadn't just been negligent. She had actively used her position to silence a witness through psychological manipulation. When Reynolds returned, his expression was grimly satisfied. "Officers are on their way to Dr. Parker's office and home. We've also issued an alert at all border crossings and airports." "She did this to my baby," Carolyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She deliberately traumatized my child to protect a monster. And we'll make sure she faces justice for it," Reynolds promised. "Madison, you are the bravest person I know. You fought against what Dr. Parker did to you. You found your voice when it mattered most." The conversation was interrupted by a veterinary technician appearing at the doorway. "Ms. Thornton, Dr. Kingsley would like to speak with you." Carolyn's heart stuttered. "Is Atlas—" "He's still in surgery," the technician said quickly. "But they've found something unusual during the procedure. If you could come with me." Carolyn hesitated, glancing at Maddie. "I'll stay with her." Reynolds offered. In a small consultation room, Dr. Kingsley waited, still in surgical scrubs. Her expression was puzzled rather than grave, which Carolyn took as a hopeful sign. "Ms. Thornton, Atlas is holding his own in surgery. We've controlled the bleeding and are repairing the damaged tissue. But we found something unexpected." She held up a small evidence bag containing what appeared to be a tiny metal cylinder. This was embedded in scar tissue near his liver. "It's not a medical implant or anything I've seen before." Carolyn stared at the object in confusion. "What is it?" "I'm not sure. It appears to be some kind of small data storage device, hermetically sealed in surgical-grade titanium. Given Atlas's history in law enforcement, I thought Detective Reynolds should know about it immediately." When Reynolds saw the device, his expression transformed. "A dead man's switch," he murmured, almost to himself. "A what?" Carolyn asked. "Some undercover officers and K-9 units in high-risk operations carry secured data. If they're killed or go missing, the information still makes it back." He studied the small cylinder. "This is advanced, designed to be invisible on standard scans. Biocompatible. Atlas wasn't just a search dog. He was carrying evidence." The realization dawned slowly. "You think this contains evidence from the raid where he was injured, the one involving Whitaker? It would explain why someone tried so hard to kill him." Reynolds carefully secured the evidence bag. "This could contain everything we need to unravel Whitaker's entire operation." Back in the waiting room, Maddie had fallen into an exhausted sleep, emotional fatigue finally overwhelming her. Carolyn gently stroked her daughter's hair, the weight of all they'd learned settling heavily on her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked Reynolds quietly. "We get this to the digital forensics team immediately. As for Atlas," he glanced toward the surgery doors, "we wait." The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Twice, a nurse emerged to report that Atlas was still holding on, his condition stabilized but critical. Maddie woke briefly, accepted a juice box and sandwich, then drifted back to sleep against her mother's side. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Kingsley finally appeared, surgical cap in hand, exhaustion evident in the lines of her face. Carolyn felt her heart constrict, bracing for the worst. "He made it through surgery," the veterinarian announced, a tired smile breaking through her professional demeanor. It was touch and go for a while. His previous injuries had created significant scar tissue that complicated the repair. But he's stable now. Carolyn felt tears of relief flood her eyes. "Thank God," she whispered. "He's not out of danger yet." Dr. Kingsley cautioned. "The next 24 hours are critical. He lost a lot of blood, and at his age, with his history, recovery will be challenging." "But he has a chance." "Yes, a good one. I think he's extraordinarily resilient." Maddie stirred, blinking up at them with sleep-clouded eyes. "Atlas," she murmured. Carolyn smoothed her daughter's hair. "He made it through surgery, baby. The doctor says he's very strong." "Can I see him?" Dr. Kingsley hesitated, then nodded, briefly. "He's in recovery, heavily sedated, but I believe your presence might help him." The recovery area was dimly lit and quiet except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Atlas lay on a padded table, IV lines running into his foreleg, an oxygen tube supporting his breathing. His powerful body, usually so alert and protective, looked diminished under the thin, warming blanket. Maddie approached slowly, her eyes wide but unafraid. With gentle care that belied her 6 years, she placed her small hand on Atlas's head, careful to avoid the medical equipment. "I'm here," she whispered. "You were so brave today. You helped catch the bad man. Now you have to get better." Her voice broke slightly. "You're my best friend, Atlas. I need you." For a moment, there was no response. Then, so subtly they might have missed it, Atlas's tail moved the faintest twitch of recognition. Outside in the hallway, Detective Reynolds received an urgent call from the forensics team. The cylinder found in Atlas had indeed contained data-encrypted video footage from the Operation Playground raid 3 years earlier. The preliminary decryption revealed Whitaker clearly visible, directing the trafficking operation, his face captured in unambiguous detail. But the videos contained something even more damning. Dr. Amelia Parker appeared in multiple clips, evaluating children, directing their processing with clinical detachment. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. "We've got them both," the forensics lead reported. "This isn't just about Madison or Emma Sullivan. We're looking at dozens of victims over years. This breaks the whole network wide open." Reynolds felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, sorrow for the victims, and profound respect for the wounded German shepherd who had carried this evidence inside him for 3 years, waiting for the moment when justice could finally be served. In the recovery room, Maddie continued her quiet vigil beside Atlas, her newly rediscovered voice offering gentle reassurances to the dog who had helped her find her courage. The circle was complete. He had protected her, and now she would protect him. Dawn broke over Phoenix with a palette of amber and rose, the desert light filtering through the windows of the veterinary hospital where Maddie had finally succumbed to exhaustion. She slept curled in a reclining chair beside Atlas's recovery kennel, her small hand still stretched through the bars to maintain contact with her protector. Carolyn watched from the doorway, the weight of the past 24 hours etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Doctor." Kingsley approached quietly, clipboard in hand. "His vitals are improving," she murmured, careful not to wake Maddie. "Temperature's normalized, and he's responding well to the antibiotics. He's not out of the woods, but I'm cautiously optimistic." Carolyn nodded gratefully. "He's fighting hard." "They both are," the veterinarian replied, her gaze softening as it fell on Maddie. "I've never seen such a connection. It's like they understand each other on a level the rest of us can't access." Before Carolyn could respond, her phone vibrated with an incoming call from Detective Reynolds. She stepped into the hallway to answer. "Mrs. Thornton." Reynolds' voice carried the hoarse edge of a sleepless night. "I wanted to update you before you hear it elsewhere. Dr. Parker was apprehended trying to cross into Mexico this morning." Carolyn's free hand clenched at her side. "Good. The evidence from Atlas's implant is extraordinary. Not just footage of Whitaker, but comprehensive documentation of their entire operation. Names, dates, financial records all stored in that tiny device." "How did it get inside him?" Reynolds sighed heavily. "We've pieced that together from interviews with his former handler. The Operation Playground raid was based on intelligence that children were being moved through a warehouse owned by one of Whitaker's shell companies. Atlas was sent in first with a camera mounted to his tactical vest, standard procedure for high-risk entries." He paused, gathering himself. What wasn't standard was what Atlas found. Not just the children they expected, but an entire processing center, medical equipment, recording devices, documentation. Atlas's handler realized immediately they'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a single trafficking case. "And Whitaker was there," Carolyn prompted. "Yes. When Atlas discovered the hidden room, Whitaker attacked him with a hunting knife. Atlas's handler managed to fire one shot, wounding Whitaker, but not before Atlas had been stabbed multiple times. In the chaos, Whitaker escaped through a rear exit. Then how did the evidence—" Atlas's handler was former Special Forces, had seen too many cases where evidence disappeared or witnesses recanted. When he realized the scope of what they'd found, he made a decision. While Atlas was being treated for his injuries, the handler downloaded everything from Atlas's camera and secured it in a specialized data capsule. During Atlas's emergency surgery, he convinced the veterinarian to implant it off the record. Carolyn felt a chill. He turned Atlas into a living evidence locker. Yes, only he and his direct supervisor knew. The plan was to retrieve it once they identified everyone involved in the network. But 3 weeks later, the handler was killed in a supposed hit-and-run accident. His supervisor was transferred to another division. Atlas was deemed too injured to return to service, and the evidence remained hidden until now. The implications were staggering. So Atlas has been carrying the key to this entire case inside him for 3 years, while Whitaker walked free. Yes, the irony is, if Whitaker hadn't tried to take Maddie, if Atlas hadn't recognized him in court, we might never have found it. Carolyn glanced back at her sleeping daughter. Does she need to testify again, after everything with Parker? No, Reynolds assured her. The evidence from Atlas is more than sufficient. Combined with Emma Sullivan's testimony and Whitaker's outburst in court, the DA is confident in the case. Madison has done her part. After ending the call, Carolyn returned to find Maddie awake, her attention focused entirely on Atlas. The German shepherd's eyes were open now, alert despite the medication, his gaze fixed on the child as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the world. "He's better," Maddie announced with absolute certainty. "He understood everything I told him last night." Dr. Kingsley, checking Atlas's vitals, raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell him?" "That he had to stay. That I needed him." Maddie's voice, unused for so long, still carried a slightly raspy quality that would fade with time and therapy. "And that the bad people couldn't hurt anyone anymore because of what he did." The veterinarian smiled. "Well, his readings are certainly stronger this morning. Perhaps your encouragement made the difference." A soft knock at the door revealed Detective Reynolds, his face lined with exhaustion but his eyes bright. He carried a small paper bag that emitted the rich aroma of fresh pastries. "Thought you both might need breakfast," he said, offering the bag to Carolyn. "And I wanted to check on our hero." Maddie looked up. "Are you going to arrest the bad doctor like you arrested the bad man?" Reynolds knelt to her eye level. "We already did. Madison, Dr. Parker can't hurt you or anyone else anymore." "Good." Maddie's expression turned serious. "She made me think I would hurt Mommy if I talked. She showed me a special watch and said words that made my head feel funny. Then whenever I tried to talk, I got scared." Reynolds nodded gently. "That's called hypnosis. She used it in a very wrong way. But you were stronger than her tricks, weren't you? You found your voice when it mattered most." Pride flickered across Maddie's face. "Atlas helped me be brave." While they talked, Dr. Kingsley completed her examination of Atlas. "His surgical site looks good. No signs of infection. If he continues improving, we might be able to move him to a regular recovery kennel by this evening." "And after that?" Carolyn asked. "He'll need several weeks of careful monitoring and rest. The internal damage was extensive. He won't be able to return to any kind of working role." Maddie's head snapped up. "He's coming home with us," she stated with absolute conviction. "He needs me." Carolyn hesitated. "Sweetheart, Atlas might need special care." "I can help," Maddie insisted. "He saved me. Now I'll save him." Reynolds and Dr. Kingsley exchanged glances. "Actually," the detective said carefully, "there might be a way to make that happen. Given Atlas's extraordinary service and his role in breaking this case, the department might be willing to officially retire him to your care, with medical support, of course." Hope blossomed on Maddie's face. "Really?" "I'll have to speak with my superiors, but I think we could arrange it. After all, he's already chosen his person." Reynolds nodded toward Atlas, whose attention remained fixed on Maddie despite his weakened state. Later that morning, as Carolyn stepped out to make necessary arrangements for an extended stay near the veterinary hospital. Detective Reynolds received an urgent call from the prosecutor's office. He took it in the hallway, his expression growing increasingly grim as he listened. "When?" he asked sharply. "And you're certain?" A pause. "I understand. Keep me updated." Returning to Atlas's room, he found Maddie reading aloud from a children's book someone had brought, her voice gaining strength and confidence with each page. She paused when she noticed his troubled expression. "What's wrong?" she asked with the directness only children can manage. Reynolds chose his words carefully. "There's been a development in the case. Dr. Parker is cooperating with investigators. She's providing information about everyone involved in Mr. Whitaker's operation." "That's good, right?" Maddie looked confused by his somber tone. "Yes, it is. But she's also making some claims about why she did what she did. She says Mr. Whitaker threatened her family if she didn't help him." Carolyn, who had returned in time to hear this, shook her head in disgust. "She's trying to save herself." "Possibly," Reynolds acknowledged. "But the situation is complicated. There's evidence she may have been Whitaker's victim before she became his accomplice. Years ago, as a teenager." The room fell silent as they absorbed this disturbing possibility, the victim becoming perpetrator, the cycle of abuse extending across generations. "There's something else," Reynolds continued reluctantly. "Whitaker attempted suicide in his cell this morning. He's under medical supervision now, but he left a partial confession implicating numerous prominent citizens in his operation." "Will he survive?" Carolyn asked, her hand protectively on Maddie's shoulder. "Yes, he was found quickly, but this case is about to explode beyond anything we anticipated. The names in his confession and in Atlas's evidence include judges, business leaders, even a state senator." As if sensing the gravity of the conversation, Atlas struggled to raise his head, a low whine escaping him. Maddie immediately returned to his side, her small hands gentle on his muzzle. "It's okay," she soothed. "You did your job. You kept the evidence safe until people could use it." Reynolds watched the interaction with a mixture of wonder and sorrow. The bond between the traumatized child and wounded dog transcended ordinary understanding. Two souls who had encountered darkness, yet somehow preserved their capacity for trust and healing. The microchip evidence was proving to be the key that unlocked a case far larger and more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Financial records showed a sophisticated operation spanning at least 8 states, with dozens of children transported through Whitaker's network over the past decade. The implicated individuals included people in positions specifically chosen to protect children, education administrators, family court officials, even foster care coordinators. Most disturbing were the psychological protocols developed by Dr. Parker's specialized techniques to ensure victims remained silent, using a combination of hypnosis, behavior modification, and targeted threats. Maddie had been one of the first to break through this conditioning, her connection with Atlas somehow providing the strength to overcome Parker's manipulation. As the enormity of the case unfolded across news channels and emergency legislative sessions, Atlas continued his quiet fight for recovery, unaware of the far-reaching consequences of the evidence he had carried. In his world, there was only the next breath, the next moment of healing, and the unwavering presence of the little girl who refused to leave his side. On the 3rd day after surgery, Atlas managed to stand briefly, his legs trembling with effort, but his determination absolute. Maddie's delighted encouragement echoed through the recovery ward, her voice growing stronger each day as she practiced using it again. "See," she told Reynolds triumphantly, "he's fighting, just like I told him to." The detective nodded, recognizing in her words the simple truth at the heart of their intertwined stories. Sometimes survival itself is an act of defiance, and healing becomes possible only when we are truly seen by another soul. 6 months later, autumn painted the desert landscape with subtle shifts of color as Carolyn Thornton stood on the back porch of their new home, watching Maddie in the spacious, securely fenced yard. The Thorntons had moved from Saguaro Valley to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix, away from the memories and media attention that had made their previous house impossible to call home. Maddie knelt in the grass beside Atlas, her copper curls catching the late afternoon sunlight as she carefully adjusted the special support harness that helped stabilize the German Shepherd's healing body. Though he would never regain his former strength, Atlas had made remarkable progress in the months since his surgery. The veterinarians attributed his recovery to a combination of excellent medical care and the unwavering presence of the little girl who had appointed herself his personal rehabilitation specialist. "Slow steps. Remember?" Maddie instructed, her once silent voice now confident and clear. Atlas responded with the focused attention that characterized their unique bond, pacing deliberately beside her along the pathway they had worn through the yard during their daily therapy sessions. Carolyn smiled at the sight, marveling at the transformation in her daughter. The traumatized, mute child of 6 months ago had blossomed into a spirited 7-year-old whose experiences had left her not broken, but remarkably compassionate. Twice weekly, Maddie and Atlas visited the Children's Trauma Center where they worked with other young survivors. The girl and her dog serving as living proof that healing was possible even after the darkest experiences. The doorbell chimed, drawing Carolyn inside to greet their expected visitors. Judge Eleanor Blackwood stood on the threshold, her silver hair neatly styled and her posture as dignified as ever, though the grief in her eyes had softened to a quiet acceptance in the months since Claire's remains had been properly laid to rest. "Eleanor, come in." Carolyn welcomed her, embracing the woman who had become an unexpected friend through their shared connection to the case. Behind the judge stood Detective Reynolds, now promoted to lieutenant following the successful prosecution of what the media had dubbed the Whitaker Network. "They're in the backyard," Carolyn explained, leading them through the house. "Maddie's been excited all day about showing Atlas's progress." On the patio, Maddie looked up with a bright smile as she spotted their visitors. "Watch this," she called, turning to Atlas with quiet confidence. "Atlas, demonstration." The German Shepherd carefully positioned himself, then executed a modified version of his training routine, not the full movements he once performed with athletic grace, but a dignified display of his continuing recovery and adaptability. "He's doing wonderfully," Eleanor observed, genuine warmth in her voice. "Both of you are." Reynolds nodded agreement. "The department sends their regards. The Atlas program is officially launching next month. Therapy dogs paired with child survivors, just like you suggested." Maddie beamed with pride. Since the trial, she had become passionate about helping other children find their voices, insisting that every trauma survivor deserved an Atlas of their own. As the adults settled into conversation on the patio, Maddie returned to Atlas's side, wrapping her arms around his neck in a gentle embrace. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, his amber eyes reflecting the unspoken understanding that had saved them both. "We did it," she whispered against his fur. "We're home." In the quiet sanctuary of their new beginning, surrounded by those who had walked through darkness with them, Maddie and Atlas had found something precious beyond measure, not just survival, but the promise of a future where their scars, though permanent, no longer defined the boundaries of their world. The evening sun cast long shadows across the yard as they gathered for dinner, a family forged not by blood but by shared purpose and profound connection. Through them all ran a single, unbreakable thread, the knowledge that in the right company, even the deepest wounds could heal, and the silenced could find their voice once more. In a world that often feels increasingly divided and uncertain, this story reminds us of truths we've always known but sometimes forget. Like Maddie and Atlas, many of us have faced our own dark chapters, losses that left us speechless, wounds that still ache on cold mornings, and moments when justice seemed just beyond reach. We've witnessed how quickly trust can be broken when those in positions of authority abuse their power. Yet this story speaks to something deeper in the American spirit that resonates especially with those of us who've lived long enough to see both humanity's failings and its remarkable capacity for redemption. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections come without words, in the steady presence of someone who refuses to leave when the night grows darkest. It affirms that our instincts about protecting children and standing against evil matter profoundly, even when our voices tremble, and perhaps most powerfully, it tells us that no matter our age or what we've endured, we can still make a difference, still be the person who recognizes someone else's silent pain, still be the hand that reaches out, still be the voice that speaks when others cannot.